Small. Wow, tiny.
You are currently listening to Tiny Table,
where we explore TTRPGs you might not have heard of.
Whether big or small, we hope to cover them all.
Because we know that great things can come in tiny packages.
Hey there, this is Skyler, and the following episode is our rules rundown for Fiasco Classic. If you feel like you already have all the wits and know-how to make your personal heist a success, then feel free to skip ahead to the actual play episodes. However, if this is your first time, you need a refresher, or you simply want to hear more yapping from yours truly, then kick up your feet, get cozy, and we'll give you all you need to know. Time for one last job. Fiasco lets you create an original Coen Brothers movie in the same time it would take to watch one. The GM-less collaborative story game will appeal to fans of Fargo, Burn After Reading, and Blood Simple. You won't know who you'll play, or how they'll interact with the other characters until you discover them together at the table. All you know is this: sometime soon, this sordid set of somebodies and nobodies will wind up in a disastrous situation of their own invention. Characters with lofty ambitions and abysmal impulse control will set off a Rube Goldberg machine that can only lead to catastrophe. What started as a simple scam has wound up with you and your partner digging a shallow grave for an unsuspecting loser. And buddy, you're not a penny richer. At the intersection of greed, fear, and lust, your characters will dream big, fall short, and, if they're lucky, maybe even live to tell the tale. One way or another, it's gonna be a fiasco. What you'll need. Fiasco is a game of 3 to 5 players, all of whom share equal role at the table. This game is our first featured on the show with no game master, as the process is wholly collaborative and requires no preparation before play. While we recommend all players read the rules, as good players always do, the game is also easy to teach off the cuff if you're familiar with the rules already and want to explain them to a new player and start playing right away. The game recommends that the most familiar player wear the hat of the facilitator for any moments of confusion, though this isn't a role with any mechanical significance. A game of Fiasco will run about 2.5 hours. This game is explicitly designed around individual narratives, making this the perfect game for a night of role-playing fun during a small group hangout. The lack of preparation needed for play, as well as the egalitarian GM-less design, makes this the rare role-playing game you can float to your friends and start playing in literal minutes. You can breathe a sigh of relief knowing that come hell or high water, your character will see a full resolution to their narrative arc within 2 hours of you learning their name. Now, whether that resolution involves them on the run from the police, dead in a ditch, or right back where they started, you'll need to play to find out. What you need to play will vary depending on whether or not you're playing Fiasco or Fiasco Classic. Fiasco includes everything you need to play in the box, no outside items needed. Fiasco Classic, on the other hand, asks each player to provide 4 6-sided dice in 2 colors. For our rules explanation here, we'll be referring to these as black and white dice. You'll also need a few index cards and something to write with. We played Fiasco Classic at our table, and we'll be referencing the classic rules both here and in-game. The box game operates nigh identically, though it simplifies play by replacing the randomness of dice and index cards with a printed deck of cards for reference. Both versions of the game can be purchased from bullypulpitgames.com. Before we continue, a few content warnings. Fiasco and its rules operate in the black comedy zone of criminal drama. The rulebook includes copious references to violence, murder, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and everything else you'd expect from the genre. This is a game about unscrupulous people with something to gain and everything to lose. And it's explicit in the rules that you should be ready for your character to wind up dead or miserable by the story's conclusion. The original rules are also written in a conversational tone, profuse with lighthearted swearing and grim humor, so they'll give you a good expectation of whether the tone of this game is right for you. It also has a fair deal of gendering to the players and characters that, while benefiting the genre, reads a little awkwardly in present year. Players and characters are only ever referred to as he and him, and a successful character may get the girl to drop her drawers, that sort of thing. In our own play, expect to see Old West gender norms, violence, murder, alcoholism, and a mail-order bride. Modes of play. A game of Fiasco features 5 distinct phases: the setup, Act 1, the tilt, Act 2, and the aftermath. The setup begins with the players agreeing on a playset, which broadly dictates the setting of the game's narrative. Playsets can be found on page 60 and run the gamut from the American beauty of suburban Americana to an isolated Antarctic station, if that's your thing. Once you've picked your playset, everyone rolls their dice into a central pile. From these die results, you'll select and assign various relationships and details from the playset to yourself or other players. With each selection, write that choice on an index card and take the die you use to make that choice out of the central pile until all dice have been used. Each of these choices have 2 tiers, one broad and one specific, that you'll hone in on over the rounds of selection. On your first turn, you might take a 3 to mark the relationship between you and the player to your right as a friendship. Later, another player might choose a 1 to mark this friendship as one between a manipulator and a victim. Now, we're getting to the good stuff. By the end of the setup, each player will have a relationship with the player to their right and to their left, and each relationship will have a detail such as an object, a location, or a need. In just a few short rounds, you'll build a tightly bound web of characters with volatile needs ready to crash into each other. All you need to do now is name them, put all the dice back in the center, and you're ready to ride. Acts 1 and 2 will play out in individual scenes. Play proceeds in order around the table, starting with the player who grew up in the smallest town. When it's your turn, it's time to shine the spotlight on your character. You choose whether you're in charge of establishing the scene or resolving the scene. If you establish, you lay out the basics of how the scene begins. Where are we in the narrative? Who is your scene partner? What's the situation? But you're not in charge of how the scene resolves. That's up to the other players. At a point in the scene where it feels right, anyone at the table can hand you either a black die or a white die from the central pile. If the die is white, the scene outcome is positive for your character. If the die is black, the outcome is negative. Alternatively, you can be the master of your own resolution, choosing for yourself how your scene will end. But at the cost of letting the other players establish the scene for you. Regardless of how the scene plays out, what you do with the die for the scene afterwards depends on the act. In Act 1, you give the die to a different player, and in Act 2, you keep it for yourself. Once the scene ends, play will continue to pass around the circle. Once you've played through half the scenes, which you'll know once half the dice are gone from the center, you've hit the tilt. Everyone rolls whatever die they have in front of them and tally the black and white totals, subtracting the lesser from the greater. Whichever 2 players have the highest black result and white result respectively, each get to select one element for the tilt. These are the iconic moments of catastrophe that will define how everything goes terribly, terribly wrong in Act 2. The tilt table can be found on page 56 and includes such juicy morsels as a neighbor wanders into the situation, and you thought it was taken care of, but it wasn't. At some point during Act 2, each of these elements must happen whenever the opportunity presents itself. Once you have your tilt, take a break, stretch your legs, gab about how nervous you are for the inevitable unraveling, and then get ready for Act 2. Once the final die is taken, Act 2 ends, and the story reaches the aftermath. This is the denouement after whatever climax you reach in Act 2's concluding scenes, and it's time to let the chips fall where they may. Old Officer McGillicuddy was only a week from retirement, and now that he's careening down I-95 in a busted-up Studebaker with his cousin bleeding out in the passenger seat, all he has left to do is wonder where it all went wrong. It seemed like such a good idea at the time. Take all the dice in front of you and roll them, subtracting low from high, just like in the tilt. Consult the aftermath table on page 58 to determine your fate. Low results are catastrophic, most results are terrible, but exceedingly high results mean you may just pull it off after all. Play out the aftermath in montage, going around the table as before. On your turn, place a die in the middle of the table and make a single statement, always starting with, "This is." A character who really takes the fall might start their montage by saying, "This is Father Donahue, gripping his rosary as the cops bang on the door." While a more successful character might say, "This is Sally Mae, returning to her mild-mannered book club sporting a very impressive new brooch." When you're out of die, your story is over, and boy, what a fiasco. Legal. Tiny Table is an independent production of Tiny Table LLC and is not affiliated with Bully Pulpit Games LLC. Fiasco is written by Jason Morningstar, edited by Steve Seghetti, with layout by Patrick Murphy and Gilia Barbano. Fiasco and Fiasco Classic are copyright trademarks of Bully Pulpit Games LLC. And with that, you're ready to play. Good luck out there, you crazy son of a bitch.
Hi, and thank you for listening to our podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, then we'd really appreciate if you left us a review. If you really like what we do here and want to support us further, you can join us at patreon.com/tinytablepodcast. Our business email is also open for inquiries at tinytablebusiness@gmail.com, and all of our socials can be found in the episode description for any shenanigans you might want to follow. Till next time, see ya!